Welcome, everybody. I'm Michaela Parker, Executive Director for the Academic Data Science Alliance, and you are here in our kickoff of a series of virtual content that we're bringing to you. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, the Academic Data Science Alliance, or ADSA, is a community of data science researchers and educators who take responsibility for a just, equitable future where data science approaches are thoughtfully applied in all domains for the benefit of all. There's a little QR code on the bottom of this slide. You want to snap a picture, that'll bring you to our website where you can read quite a bit more about our activities, our mission, vision, values, and how to become a member. And now I will turn it over to Sarah Stone, who's the Executive Director for the eScience Institute at the University of Washington and co-chair of this session.
Thank you so much, Michaela. And thank you to both you and Steve and ADSA for keeping our session in its previous scheduled time slot. Sad not to be able to see you all in person, but this is a really nice opportunity to continue the session that we had planned on the kind of joint day of the Leadership Summit and the annual meeting. My name's Sarah Stone. I'm the Executive Director, as Michaela said, at the University of Washington eScience Institute. And my co-chair for this session is Doug Hague at UNC Charlotte. And we were really excited to convene this session to focus on university-based initiatives that are really seeking to make a positive social impact through the use of data-intensive technologies. And of course, this work requires really complex cross-sector partnerships and a nuanced understanding of the social issues and contexts in question. So today we're bringing you a session that leads off with two talks. The first will highlight Data for Good summer programs, which provide hands-on training for students while also advancing project-based work with deep engagement with stakeholders. The second talk will focus on infrastructure partnerships that can support researchers' access to local government data and support these types of programs. Then the last part of the session will bring a lively panel of experts who engage in this work across really a breadth of different types of programs and collaborations. As Michaela noted, please feel free to drop questions in the Q&A at any time, and we'll try and address those throughout the session. So now I'd like to turn things over to Dharma Dailey to get us started. Dharma is a research associate at the University of Washington eScience Institute, where she works to understand how human-centered design practices can be incorporated into data-intensive research. She has a PhD in human-centered design and engineering from the UW and is the human-centered design mentor for eScience's Data Science for Social Good program. In that program, she really coaches our DSSG teams to explore the social dimensions of their projects as a team, to interact with stakeholders, and to integrate that awareness into their project work. She has also, over the past year and a half, been working with the Data for Good Organizers Network to document better practices for running data science for social good programs. And that's really a lot of the work that she'll be sharing with us today. So thank you, Dharma.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. So to set the stage for our discussion today, I'm going to briefly address two questions. First off, what we mean by data for good, and secondly, what a data for good program is. Today's presentation draws on the just released paper, the Data for Good Growth Map Decision Points for Designing a University-Based Data for Good program, which is aimed at helping fledgling data for good programs by focusing on the decision points new programs are likely to encounter as they're designing their program. The paper is the culmination of 22 months of work among 36 contributors from 17 universities, including several of our panelists today. Okay, so first off, what do we mean by data for good? To quote from our paper, we position data for good as aspirational, relational, dynamic, and contested. We view data for good programs as places to advance our understanding and practice of data for good work. We aim not to naively apply data-intensive methods to questions of profound social consequence, but rather to reflexively and systematically explore what it takes to do good with data. As places that convene students, faculty, government, nonprofit, and industry partners, We view Data for Good programs as valuable venues to foster dialogue, envision, and explore better practices for doing good with data. Among the programs in our network of contributors, there is no single common definition of social good across these programs. Rather, each emphasizes different kinds of social impact. The slightly different framings of social good among our contributors is suggested by the names of their respective programs: Data Science for the Common Good, Data Science for Public Good, and Data Science for Social Good, which collectively we are calling Data for Good programs. Looking at the topic themes that contributing programs tackle provides another lens into what we mean by data for good. Public health, environment and natural resources, transportation, planning and development, education, and governance are at the top of a long list of social goods, public goods, and common goods addressed in these programs. Our contributors envision Data for Good programs as platforms to foster a range of benefits to partner organizations, students, the community of the university, program leadership, as well as broader societal impacts. Okay, now a little bit more about what a Data for Good program is. We started answering this question by surveying 8 programs in early 2020, and then through a series of focused discussions that followed into 2021 with a larger group of contributors. Data for Good programs are relatively new offerings. They're relatively small and intensive programs working with between 8 and 40 students per session. They're generally run as paid internships or fellowships once a year, normally in summer outside of course offerings. In the paper, we define these programs by the following common characteristics. They are university hosted, they educate students, are project and team-based, use data science techniques, integrate stakeholders, and intend a social benefit. And I'm going to give a little bit of background on each of these characteristics. University-hosted Data for Good programs are built around the desire to advance the trifecta mission of universities: education, service, and research. This distinguishes these programs from Data for Good work situated elsewhere in government, nonprofits, and industry. Advancing their educational mission, Data for Good programs educate students. These programs are extremely popular with students and appealing to commonly across programs, students from a variety of different disciplines and backgrounds. And importantly, they appeal to students who are underrepresented in STEM. And we think this is an important feature of these programs. All Data for Good programs screen for students who have an interest in social good and in doing collaborative interdisciplinary science. This distinguishes Data for Good programs from other kinds of internship and fellowship offerings. Most of our contributing Data for Good programs cater to graduate students, though that is not exclusively the case either within or across programs. Programs vary on whether they accept students from other universities and the type of support they offer to students beyond the stipend, such as whether they offer visa support or money for childcare. Finally, in terms of students served by these programs, there's also some variation in the level of data science and programming experience that is prerequisite for participation. Data science programs can be tailored to students with different levels of experience, offering either more of an introductory or more of a capstone-like experience, and sometimes offering both kinds of opportunities to different students within the same program. Another common characteristic of Data for Good programs is that they're centered on project and team-based work. However, students are not left to their own devices. Student teams are supported by technical mentors, research mentors, project mentors, as well as administrative staff. In our case at University of Washington, each project team has 4 to 5 student fellows, as well as 1 or 2 staff data scientists attached to each team. A subject matter expert, either from academia or from a partner organization, serves as project lead. Among program roles that support all teams, we have a data scientist at large, and in my role as human-centered design mentor, I support the teams to engage with project stakeholders, mentoring them in interviewing techniques, stakeholder analysis, and so on. The exact roles and responsibilities that students, faculty, and partners take on varies across programs, and there are program-specific roles such as project manager that some programs have and others don't. And the final point about project and team-based work is that it is substantively augmented by a number of other formal and informal teaching modalities such as tutorials, lectures, facilitated conversations, and one-on-one mentoring. This makes these programs very rich learning environments. Of course, Data for Good programs use data science techniques. Working on real-world projects enables deep engagement with core data science concepts, skills, and practices, some of which are difficult to advance beyond a certain point in a traditional classroom setting. For example, reproducibility, version control, and documentation skills all benefit from application to a real-world project. Importantly, data science skills are employed in concert with other skills, concepts, and practices that are also essential for project success. These include core science skills, public scholarship skills, the application of data science to public interest concerns, and experience doing data science through teamwork. This enables students to advance the range of skills needed for real-world data for good work. One caveat of making data science techniques central to a program of relatively short duration is that programs need to be intentional and tactical about which portion of the data science workflow they support. Any of the stages of a Data for Good project can be, and have been, tackled in these programs, though it is generally not feasible to tackle all of them in the 10 to 14 10 to 14 week time frame of a typical program session. A number of successful projects have focused on early stage development, helping partner organizations to articulate a research question and do data discovery. Other successful projects have focused on later stage activities, such as taking an existing data science software tool set and making that, refining it to make it more accessible to a larger pool of scientists. If the goal is for students to spend most of their time modeling with shared results at the end, then the groundwork needs to be laid down before the program starts with an articulated research question, research plan, intervention plan, and data in hand before the program starts. Another common characteristic of Data for Good programs is that they substantively integrate stakeholders, both for educational purposes and to strengthen project outcomes. Programs are strongly committed to enabling students to engage directly with stakeholders, particularly project partners. Project partners are typically government or nonprofit organizations, though people from industry and foundations are sometimes also part of the mix. Generally, there is a fair amount of engagement between program leads and project partners for project preparation leading up to the start of the program, as well as engagement throughout the program. Now, I started this talk by touching on the kinds of social benefits that programs aim to achieve, and I'm going to end on a more pragmatic note in regards to this final common characteristic among these programs. Arguably, the two most critical factors in fostering a social benefit rests on a Data for Good program's capacity to forge strong partnerships with their project partners and in selecting strong projects. I will let the panelists speak from their experience of how they establish and maintain strong partnerships. And here I will just touch on a few of the consensus considerations among our contributors for selecting Data for Good projects in these programs. There are two different sets of criteria. One set involves evaluating projects for their viability as a data science project. A strong data science project needs to be structured around a research question, and it needs to involve analytics tasks as opposed to just data engineering or only data cleaning. Whatever stage of the workflow students are working on, we want them to be engaged in the analytic work as well as the mechanics. And when the goal is to have students spend most of their time on modeling to deliver analysis by the program's end, consensus is that it's essential to have data in hand ready to use before the program starts. The other set of criteria concerns the potential of the project to manifest a social benefit. There needs to be a strong rationale for why and how the project will make a positive social impact. Ethical concerns must be carefully considered and addressed. And also, consideration needs to be given to the viability and sustainability of the intervention beyond the Data for Good program. The best projects have strong purchase on all of these criteria across program leadership, students, and partner organizations. This concludes my brief introduction to university-based Data for Good programs run as summer programs. If you have questions right now, feel free to put them into the Q&A. If you would like to learn more about these kinds of programs, I invite you to download our paper and/or to join us for January, a series of 2-hour workshops on creating university-based Data for Good programs. You can follow the links here that are on this slide, but also perhaps the facilitators can share them via the chat. And I would like to thank the University of Washington eScience Institute, as well as the West Big Data Innovation Hub for sponsoring this work. And thank you for listening, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dharma. That was a really nice introduction to get us going today. Any questions? Please drop them in the Q&A. Doesn't look like we have, oh, well, we have one come in. How do you fund these programs? It's a great question. Go ahead, Dharma.
Everybody's most pressing question. So there's a variety of ways that programs are funded, and programs also rely a lot on in-kind support as well. So I don't think that there's one way that across the programs, there's just one source of funding, or even within programs. I think that people are drawing on multiple sources. But there's university funds. Some programs are relying on those. Some programs are getting foundation support. Gizem has a good funding model that she could explain as well. I think she could probably explain it better than I, where it's coming. It's a portion of funds coming from research projects that are set aside. Yeah. So I don't know. Gizem, do you want to talk about your model? I just saw you on mute.
Yep, of course. So we're a soft funded research institute. So we actually have multiple projects, multi-year projects that are going on in our division. So what we do is that when we're writing these grants, when we're getting the projects, we have certain portion of the budget that will be allocated to the SPG program. And that's the way that we can support some of these students, their stipends. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And in our case, like, for example, our project leads are often working on their own research. So we're not supporting the project leads because they're directed on their, basically, hopefully giving them some free work and a boost on their work. So there's a lot of in-kind support, I think, that a lot of these project programs also rely on.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Dharma. I know that we want to move on to the next speaker, but you'll have a chance to ask a lot of these types of questions to the panel. And with that, I'll thank you again, Dharma, for your talk, and I'll point to Doug.
Thank you, Sarah, and I appreciate the opportunity. My name's Doug Hague, and I was the co-organizer with Sarah of this session, and I want to thank all of the presenters and for you attending. It's my great pleasure to introduce Amy Hawn Nelson, who is a research faculty and the Director of Training and Technical Assistance for the Actionable Intelligence for Social Policy, and we'll put some links into the chat here in a few minutes, which is at the University of Pennsylvania, and she runs these in-depth technical assistance across cross-sector data integration, where you're integrating 30+ sites into one single data set. And so she also advises and trains these across the country so that we can have these, what's called an integrated data set for different communities around the country. And so we will get to hear her experience on that. But the last thing I'll say before she takes over is she did receive her PhD from here at UNC Charlotte in urban education. But with that, I'll turn it over to Amy. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Doug. All right. Hi, everyone. It is lovely to be here with you. And I am not a data scientist and I am not student facing. I don't interact with students for any component of my job. So some of you may be like, why is she talking to us today for this panel? But I'll connect the dots as I do, as I get through my slide deck. So as Doug said, I'm Amy Hawn Nelson, and I am confusing because I work for Penn, but I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. So AISP is a small but mighty organization, at least that's the way we like to think of ourselves, and we are singularly focused on ethical data use. So generally speaking, that means we help state and local governments collaborate and responsibly use data to improve lives. We work with public sector data only. That is our lane, and we try to stay in it. We are a bit confusing for folks. So just to frame it out, we don't hold any data. We don't run an integrated data system, although that's what we write a lot about and think a lot about. We are not focused on academic research. We do academic research, but most of our work is applied. I definitely think of myself as an applied researcher. And we do a lot of like connecting and community building and I'm often referred to as someone's data sharing therapist. I do a lot of like site-based TA work that is, deep work and ongoing. I have a lot of sites I've worked with for many years. Our network is, depending on how you count us, it's about 36 sites. UNC Charlotte is a part of one site. You will see that little dot in the middle of North Carolina. We have several sites represented today. You're going to hear from some work in Iowa, as well as Miami-Dade, which is we have categorized as a developing site. Core of our work is our network. So everything we do is not intellectual. It is not an intellectual exercise. Everything we do is applied in that we write about things we've seen work, or we write about things we've seen not work, and learnings that we pull from that experience. So everything we do is grounded in experience that folks have in actually trying to develop shared data infrastructure. Our kind of big joke is that, data sharing is not for the weak. It is tough work. You have to have some fortitude around it. But it is good work and important work. And so that is our focus. We do a lot of, guidance, standards, creation. We like to write a good white paper. I do a ton of just training and consulting work. In my role in particular, some colleagues of mine do more of the advocacy and comms work. And then we all are part of actionable research. Here are 4 just examples of the type of work that we do. All of these have been released in the past year. In true 2020, 2021 fashion, our website is not working properly right now. It is conference season, and our website has been kind of down all week-ish. So don't put a www in front of anything and it might work, is where our web developer left us. So I've tried to put links into the chat that work. If they don't work, I apologize, loop back. We're told it would be fixed within 24 to 48 hours. All right, so the core thing to know about us is that we aren't technologists. None of us are data scientists by training. We all have a lot of experience with data science and a lot of analytics, and we know enough to be annoying, but that is not our training and not our expertise. We are focused on thinking about data sharing as deeply relational work. In fact, we see it as more relational than it is technical. And we also talk a lot about integrating not just data, but people, right? We have to have conversations that are very purposeful and carefully orchestrated for us to do data sharing and integration well, and for us to have, public impact that is positive. It is easy to do data work poorly, is our experience. So we talk a lot about what we call integrated data systems, and we find it helpful to define that term because it is a little, nebulous. We are talking about people, not a technology platform. We are talking about cross-sector data, so not just one agency. We are talking about data curation, not data dumps, and not necessarily big data. We are not, looking for insights in particular. We come at this work with carefully constructed questions. And that is usually the only way it works with the legal frameworks. You can't kind of dig around in the data. You have to come in with very specific questions. Everything we do is public utility work. It is not research for research's sake, as we say. And every site in our network has very strongly defined governance. And that means when we say governance, we mean like people talking about things. We mean like groups of people that meet and discuss things. I know data governance has a different perspective sometimes in the technical realm, but we adhere to kind of the big blue book of data governance, but we feel strongly that those pieces have to include people talking. So why am I here, right? So data science programs are really important to the world that I am in all day. The main thing is that universities are training staff. We cannot do this work in government agencies and in the public sector without strong data science programs at the university level that truly understand public sector data. And public sector data is really nuanced and different than private sector data. And so we find the best staffing happens when you have a strong training program in data science. A lot of times analysts in our world come from like public policy backgrounds or even sociology backgrounds or social work backgrounds. But more and more we're seeing data scientists with strong training that are then getting kind of human service sector training. And that's some of our most interesting and I would say effective staff through the network. The other important piece here is that universities often serve as these neutral, trusted third parties is the way to think about it. There are lots of different models for data integration and sharing, and trusted third parties are a very common approach. So I term this as data Switzerland. So universities often serve as data Switzerland, and you will hear from two of those from the AISP network today. This is an important part of our thinking. If you're wondering, when we say integrate data systems, when we say developing our established site, what are we talking about? This is what we're talking about. These are kind of the 5 buckets of things that we are focused on and the way that we judge quality. We do have a tool that we are releasing, supposed to be released this week. I think that might be where our website is broken, but it will be out soon. But it's like a matrix for sites to kind of walk through and do a self-assessment. Should be interesting to a lot of folks on this call. Okay, so a quick few notes before we get into the weeds. I want to just make the point why I have a totally captive audience of a bunch of data scientists, that the analytics are the fun stuff, right? Like a lot of the data science training is the model building and that part. But the real value of integrated data systems and the work that we support is the vegetable part, right? So you think about it like a smoothie, right? So everybody wants the palatable, yummy drink, the smoothie, but you have to do the kale, right? So the yellow, the bananas, the analysis, the fun part, and then you have to have the substance to it, the work that kind of undergirds the fun stuff. So this is what we spent a lot of time focusing on. People say they want, this research-ready data set that is, at the individual level and fully integrated. But, we spend a lot of time helping folks think through what that means. And everyone on this call knows this, right? It means like dedupes of records. It means harmonizing data. It means standard definitions. It means data quality processes, built fields. There's all this work that has to be done. So I think that's an important part of our kind of data evangelism is really getting people to understand that this is the drudgery that is essential for high quality analytics. You cannot do the cool data science stuff unless the sites who are providing the raw data really get this right. So we spend a lot of time on what we call like helping people eat their kale. So if you hear us talk, sometimes you'll hear us refer to that, and that's what we're talking about. We also talk a lot about really unfun things like metadata, In fact, I did a presentation earlier today for a different national meeting on metadata. I did another one on data quality. So these are things we kind of obsess about and talk about a lot, and try to draw people's attention to. We think a lot around ethical use, and a key part of that is this concept of different types of data. So our main lane is restricted data. If data has a legal agreement around it, that means it is restricted data in some way. Either it's a smaller cell size, or it is legally protected through some statute or rule. And so that's mainly where we are in our work. What's really interesting, though, is these distinctions are rarely documented in metadata. If you go into agencies and work directly with government agencies. So this is framing that we talk a lot about, and we highly encourage folks to include this explicitly in their metadata. The other thing that we highly encourage folks to include in their metadata, and just want to lift this up again while I have a captive audience, is this idea of kind of owner, steward, custodian. This is another place where our sites that have strong data documentation processes regularly include this in their metadata. So data owner, the short summary of that is like, who can sign? Like, who can put a signature on a document to allow access or use? They would be the data owner. There are a lot of folks in agencies who think they're data owners who are not. It is usually like a division head or some kind of executive leader. Data steward is probably a lot of folks on this call to some degree, or folks that you work directly with within agencies. The data steward is the content expert. They're the people that muck about in the data, that know the nuances, know what fields to hide and what fields to use, and kind of everything in between. And then the data custodians, these are more the IT professionals, the folks who have, strong training around security, ensure compliance with storage and compliance with different federal regs like, CGIS or, different data storage components. So again, we find this to be an essential part of metadata that is often missing, and is really relevant to ethical access and use. So we also think a lot about the data lifecycle. All of you probably have your own favorite lifecycle. We all have our ones that we use. This is one that we find helpful. So we like to think about where the project starts, and what you're doing in your role. So if an integrated data system world, there is really decision-making authority or like some kind of power efficacy at each one of these roles. But oftentimes, for a data science project, especially one that's shorter term, or one that is you're receiving data rather than helping collect it, you may be entering into this data lifecycle process at a different place. So we think this framing is really important to help people understand like where you are working. A lot of folks are working at, either the use of algorithms and statistical tools phase or the data analysis. And I'm going to walk us through just very quickly a few sites or a few projects from our panelists who are working at every stage of the data lifecycle, which I think is really exciting and really interesting. So we actually don't have a panelist from this site, but this is where Doug, I think Doug, you're board chair, right, of ISC now? If not on the board, are you board chair?
Yeah, I'm on the board.
Okay, on the board.
Our city data manager is the chair.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Doug's like, no, not board chair. Definitely not. It's a big job. So this is the effort in my community in Mecklenburg County. So this is just a good example. They used high quality curated data to help describe and put data around some homelessness data. So just a quick example, you can see the time spent of the project is ongoing. It's been going on for a long time. There's really strong reporting and dissemination. It is well staffed. The funding comes directly from the county to get at that question we had a few moments ago of how these things are funded. That's one example. And then here we have the impact. I am intentionally blowing through these because they are available and I don't want to read to you. So here is another really great example from our panelists, Gizem, who is working with the Arlington County Fire Department. Another a project that went on for over a year, another project that spanned the entire data life cycle. Staffing was a range of staff, multiple people, and it looks like the funding was internal from the university, which again is another model. Here is another great example that we will hear from today. This is a Florida-based example. This was University of North Florida was the kind of the main driver of this. Again, a long period, or the initial period was the summer of 2017, the entire life cycle, a range of staffing, a range of looks like one funder, which happens, and then strong impact. Another one from the University of Chicago. I think David might be mentioning this in a little bit, but again, a problem, multiple organizations involved, a range of data, project is ongoing for over a year, and then independent funding and strong impact. So these last two projects are ones that I wanted to lift up in particular because this is a great example of this combination of data science for social good and established shared data infrastructure. So the I2D2 is the integrated data system that is in Iowa. It is early childhood focused and has a range of funding. And this is an example of a one project that they have done out of that I'm sure Cass will mention again in a moment. But this was around dashboard indicators. This is ongoing work and very iterative. Again, a range of staffing, a range of funding, and documented impact. And then here we have some work in Miami. I think Miami gets the Endurance Award. This is work that started in 2013. Rebecca, that whole data sharing is not for the weak. Rebecca has proven that through and through in her work, but really strong work looking at early childhood programs in Miami-Dade County. A tremendous range of organizations involved, a range of staffing and funding, and tremendous impact. So a really good example of this duality that can occur with data science for social good programs using established shared data infrastructure. And there's more information about Miami-Dade if you need it. Here's my contact information just so you have it. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing so we can kick it to some questions and then get into our panel questions.
Yes. Thank you very much, Amy. I appreciate it for that very quick, broad overview. We do have one question, and it relates to how does your work relate to the FAIR and CARE? And if you know what those are, great. If not, I can say FAIR is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable principles, and the CARE are collective benefit, authority to control, responsible, and ethics. I think these are very much in there, but do you care to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm actually not familiar with those exact acronyms, but they make total sense to me. And yeah, I mean, as I said, the core of our work, like if we designate a site as an integrated data system as part of our network, that by definition means they have governance and legal already figured out. So they have groups of people very purposefully selected and chosen with social license around that, who are making decisions about data access and use. And then there's strong legal protections. So that usually is a range or a layer of documents. So not only like an MOU, but almost always there's multiple agreements, often including informed consent, which seems to be related to some of those principles. But I will Google those because that sounds like something I should know
I will
about.
put it in. And with
Thank
that,
you.
I think we'll go directly into the panel session. So if you want to introduce our panelists.
Yeah, we'd love to. Apologies in advance.
I can't hear anything on my TV.
Sorry, all. It is I'm East Coast, so it's that time of day. Our panel is very exciting. They are folks who both come to us from integrated data systems and from folks who are in the work of this. So we are going to kick it to individual panels to kind of introduce themselves. And just to remind everyone, the slides that I just presented are available, and encourage folks to look at the exact project descriptions because those were selected by the panelists. So, all right, I'm going to go in order of who's on my screen. So Gizem, can I get you just to do a quick intro?
Of course. So my name is Gizem. I'm a research associate professor at UVA's Biocomplexity Institute. I'm an economist by training. I'm also the co-director of our data science for the public good young scholars program. We have been running the program since 2014. It used to be at Virginia Tech, then we moved to UVA, and we've been running here since 2019. We also received some funding from USDA in 2020, and we managed to launch the program in 4 different universities, and Cass will be talking about the Iowa State program in a bit. We're very happy about that. In addition to that, we also launched our program in Turkey. So it's a bit different than our design, but it showed us that these types of programs can actually be tailored to different cultures, different needs. So it was a good experience for us. So for now, that's all from me, and I'll let the next panelist speak.
Great. Cass, will you jump in?
Sure. So I've had a chance to work with Gizem. As she mentioned, we have the Data Science for the Public Good program here at Iowa State. And we did this with funding from the USDA, was our beginning funding back in 2019. We've done it in 2020, as well as funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And one of the things that makes us unique is in that funding with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we were really interested if we could use the cooperative extension system in our land-grant universities to kind of translate the information that we were getting at the university and take it out to all of these communities, particularly geographically isolated communities. So that was one of the issues that we've tried to think about is how can BSPG be really far reaching, and how can we incorporate partners that can build trust to get it into those communities that need it. So it's one of the ways that we're a little bit different from some other programs, but it's one of the things I love. And I will also say it's been a pleasure. I work with Amy in the AISB because I have co-founded the Iowa Integrated Data System for Decision Making. Our director is Heather Rouse, and we are working a lot in this early childhood space. And so we had the chance last summer to do our first DSVG project with our integrated data system. So that's sort of what I will chat about in our panel today.
Great. David, you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. Anyway, it's been a real pleasure already to start off and hear such great presentations already, and I'm delighted to join this panel. I'm David Uminsky. I'm the Executive Director of the Data Science Institute here at the University of Chicago. It is a very new institute, like website issues. Let's just say one's about to go up and becoming more live in public for this coming fall. You know, I was recruited and I moved from the University of San Francisco in the Bay Area, where I had been working for about 5 years on a lot of data science for social impact work. It's not to swap out a G for an I, but there's a little bit of nuance in the way we think about the work we're doing in terms of impact with our partners. I'm proud to say that part of the founding principles of the new institute here isn't around outreach, inclusion, and community impact. Our funding has largely come from the Eric and Wendy Schmidt 11th Hour Project, but we have actually found new sources of foundation funding for a lot of new opportunities we're starting to explore. You know, our approach has been often from the bottom up in regard to working with our community partners. We've been working with nonprofits for a very long time, and you know, we start with some founding principle about mutual beneficiality. Many things covered, by the way, on the prior presentations. And the work has sort of bubbled up and naturally built new networks of nonprofit connections through data science that we're particularly focused on trying to nurture through an open data science platform. I think we've read a lot about governance today. You know, for me, what I'd love to chat further about and think harder about is looking at the universities on this call and those attending here, is thinking about the universities that are not here and how they could implement. Funding is a key piece of this, but it's also about thinking about new models of social impact through data that is more sustainable for different universities. It's one of the big new initiatives we're starting here, is to think about incorporating universities that aren't traditionally able to self-fund these or attract research funding for them. And that's a big part of the time that we're spending, in addition to continually expanding new models of social impact education here at the University of Chicago.
Great. All right, Karthik, you want to go next?
Yep. All right. So my name is Karthikeyan Umapathy. I am from Associate Professor in School of Computing in University of North Florida, which is in Jacksonville, Florida. So I am one of the co-director for Florida Data Science for Social Good program. And the other co-director is Dr. Dan Richard. He's from a psychology program. So it's a combined effect for us. Most other faculty, staff members in other colleges within our universities are also involved in a small role within our program. Most of our projects comes from nonprofits and government agencies within Florida, state of Florida. And we work with a mix of undergraduate and graduate students. And while most of them are from UNF, we do recruit from other universities within Florida as well as outside. Our priority are supporting our university students, and then depending on the talent skills we want, we reach out to Florida universities first and then reach out to universities outside the Florida area. So, and most of our funding has been foundations, some foundations within the universities, outside universities. So yeah, foundation support has been probably the best right now for us. And some of them are small and some of them can support us for like next 2 years. And some of them is supporting only one project. So it's a mix of things like that. So that's a quick background.
Great, thank you. All right, Rebecca, last but not least.
Hi. I just want to acknowledge that I'm Amy. I'm also a mom, and that's why I'm here in my office this afternoon. So just nice to see everybody, and thanks so much for having Miami on the call. We have been at this for a long time, but I feel like we're still in the prenatal period now. We have a very long gestation process here. So happy to talk about that a little bit later with some of the Q&A, but we're also part of the ASP network sites, and so just grateful for Amy and the ASP folks for all the support that you've given us in our site. We're a county-wide integrated data system that's housed here at the University of Miami, and we have several different early learning partners. It's focused on early learning and transition to kindergarten, and we are one of the key values is trying to better understand equitable access to early learning resources across the county, and then trying to be able to share data both within and across the transition into kindergarten, within early learning, and then across the transition to kindergarten, to examine the impact and effects of some of the early learning programs on children's readiness for school. So that's us, and we're excited to be here. So thank you.
Great. All right. So we have about a little less than 40 minutes to go through some pretty meaty questions. So are you ready? All right. The first one, I'm going to punt to Karthik and Gizem to begin with. And this is a question around kind of partnership and collaboration, right? All of these programs and all of this work is at this intersection of kind of public agency, nonprofit agency, public service work. How do you ensure alignment with your work as a data scientist and your work, with analytics and what the stakeholders need and want? And then if you could add in any particular details about how students interact with those stakeholder, with that stakeholder work, that would be great.
Yeah, so engagement is a very important component of the program, both before the program starts and throughout. So we start engagement very early in the data science workflow. the stakeholders actually help define the research question in our program. And in some cases, they help us identify the administrative data sources that will be used in the projects. And some of this interaction, as I mentioned before, starts happening before the program starts. So during the first couple of weeks, we want our teams to meet with the stakeholders. So the students actually get to meet with them, start the engagement at that point. They learn about the project firsthand from the stakeholders, so they can actually understand the importance of the problem from the agency's perspective, in addition to the researcher's perspective, which will be us. But it's very important for them to hear the problems that the agencies are trying to solve and why they are important and how they could actually use the findings and the insights of these projects when they're making policies. So we find that to be very motivating for our students because they can actually see the impact of what they do as they're doing this research. And as I mentioned, throughout the program, students schedule meetings, meet with them, and incorporate the insights from these stakeholders when they're conducting the research. And especially if the students are working with the administrative data provided by the stakeholders, it's very important to have a high degree of communication because you may receive the data, you don't understand the variables, but you do some analysis and then you need to go back to the stakeholder to understand what these variables mean and how to interpret these things. So, so in those projects, some of those projects will have the administrative data sources, and it's very important to have that degree of communication. And this, I think, provides the alignment, right? If you have a high degree of engagement, communication with the stakeholders, you make sure that the project is aligned with what the stakeholder is wanting. And also the students are actually informed about what the project goals are and how they will be used for impact.
So for Florida DSCs wise, most often the projects are coming from nonprofits, and they tend to be very small nonprofits, and their data collection systems are really not reliable. So most often when we go as researchers, it is sometimes we don't get straightforward answers. So we ask them to show the data during our interview process. If they're nearby, we actually go and visit them on the site to see what they do and do a bit of observational aspects too. So we have solicitation process, they answer some questions, they talk about some variables, what research questions they have. So all of those things are collected offline through solicitation process, but then we have kind of quote unquote interviews with them. And then where we make them show the data, open the file. Sometimes they say they have access to data, then we figured out later on they really don't have access to data. So we ask them to open the file and show us level when we are not clear, when we are not getting sometimes clear answers from them. So that's the initial process that we go through and we look at the data and things like that. After that, we have a nonprofit center who work very closely with us, and we present what information we have collected about different projects and which one we shortlisting, we present to them and to our board members. And then we kind of get their insights view of, okay, what we are picking, not picking. So Amy just before presented Yoga for Change project that we picked. That project initially we rejected. Then we presented things to a nonprofit center, who's at that time was our key funding. They said that we need to work with them. That's why they're funding us. Because that lady, when she came and presented her project with us, she didn't add data. Data was in postcards. It was not even in Excel file. We were like, how can we pick a project that doesn't even have a data ready? But we were talking in April and the project is going to start in June. So there was 2 months time period. So that time the nonprofit center said she can hire volunteers to get the data into Excel file if you want it. But that was the small organization. That organization proving their program works is key. And that's the why she was saying that she was trying to fund us. And we were picking larger established organizations like Mayo Clinic and things like that, who that nonprofit center was saying they should be funding us, we shouldn't be working for them for free. So we did pick that bigger organization, and then we chose to pick as a third leg kind of thing as this entity whom we initially rejected, and we picked this because of those external agencies having a review process or looking at the review process. And we ended up making the most impact for them at the end. And we continued to work with them because they had a good staff team, but didn't have access to the resources. And we, after end of the program, we used students' capstone projects and things like that to help them develop systems that was reliable data systems. And in regards to students, interns, interacting with them, we have a regular bi-weekly meetings are scheduled, and every time they have to regularly meet. And depending on the situation, we take the students to the stakeholders' sites so that they can see. Many times before the early observations, in the first 2 weeks, visiting actual client sites, either virtually or driving down and physically visiting is kind of key. And we are just in Florida. Florida is still big. We cannot travel all the way down to Jacksonville to Miami, but so those kind of things, we rely on virtual tours from the sites, like an off-day tour kind of thing, where they can talk with different people to really understand all the background contextual information they need, which becomes very powerful at the end when the students have to tell the story to a public audience at the end of the internship. So those kind of different engagement activities is very much needed for students to touch base. Most of the students comes from different domains that really don't understand anything. So a bunch of competing students, psychology students working on a therapy-based client project where they don't understand anything about therapy, and I don't understand anything about therapy also. So it's those contextual information is very much needed when we have to pick which variable is important during the analysis stage and how to tell the story of what they're doing at the end. So they play a key role with those things.
Great. And I think your comment around, a lot of times you have to teach yourself content to be able to use the tools that you're really knowledgeable about to help them solve a problem. So there's this like continuous learning process piece that I think draws a certain kind of people to this work, right? Great. We have a really good question in the Q&A, and just know that I see it and I'm coming back to it. We're going to do a few more first. There's a place where that fits in. Okay, so the next question is around this kale, force feeding kale, encouraging eating of kale idea that I talked about during my presentation. And I'm going to bounce it to Cass and Rebecca, because I think this is work that integrated data systems have to figure out, and it's hard work. And so the big question is like, how do you handle supporting the data collection, right? This is administrative data reuse. So you're not collecting data, but you do have some efficacy around guiding data collection at the agency level, right? At least a little bit. How do you deal with metadata? How do you deal with the ownership, the legal agreements, the access issues, the data transfer, data security? Like, how are you managing those kind of kale pieces of the work that aren't fun, but are fundamental? And I'll bounce it, let you speak however you'd like to approach that very large overarching question. And if you would include in your response staffing, because it's like, how do you pay for the people to do that work?
I think I could answer real quickly, but I kind of want to punt it to Cass, because I feel like you guys are a little further along than where we are. But I was just gonna comment and say that we're starting very small, and I think the idea of having institutional resources behind. So at where you all are in Iowa, I think at this, being able to, even though you're situated at the university, we have the state level kind of resources and state backing makes a difference, because I think we're starting as very small, and we're relying on local sources of funding as well as some other foundation funding, and just keeping the data use cases really close to home, whereas it's just us really doing the analysis. So we've just had to keep everything very small and have just one person who's like kind of overseeing everything as me, making sure that, you know, all of these different procedures are in place. But I wanted to punt it to Cass because I can comment on a couple of things, I guess, after you go, because I feel like you have a lot of these structures already in place that we're either still working on or we're keeping very small just because of, we do want to ensure that we have quality data that's coming in and that we're using it in the best way possible and only being responsive to the agencies who are providing the data. But it's only us now, and it's only the data custodians and the folks that are sharing the data with us that we're able to respond to the needs for. We're not able to create data use licenses out yet beyond our our internal group.
Okay, this is a great question, and I apologize. I was laughing not at you, Amy, but at the idea of like, okay, so can we talk about staffing and privacy and security and metadata and how do you figure out ownership and legal? And you have 64 seconds, go. So that seems like years of work. Before I put on like that hat, let me first answer. When I saw this question, I answered it first from my like, oh, when I was directing the first DSPG program at my university, what did I think about this? So let me throw this in to say, this is in, I was gonna say in Slack, nope, this is just in chat for this meeting. This is one of the ways that we collect information about data in our DSPG program. We actually use this for ITD2 as well, but this is a qualitative process where we go out and work with stakeholders and we, you know, they identify their pressing problem, as Gizem said, and then we say, now what data do you have to help address that? I'm bringing this up because it's one of the Q&A questions is how do you, when you leave nonprofits and you just disappear, what happens? And part of it is we're trying to help them build capacity, both in the way that they think about their work and they understand their data. We give them back anything that we've like cleaned and created. We just did a traveling food bank and we went in thinking we're going to build these awesome algorithms. We're going to predict where you need to go next. And what they really needed was someone to come and help them clean up their whole data infrastructure. And then maybe next year we'll go and work from the AI perspective on how to move it forward. Okay, so that was that hat. But now AISP, oh my gosh, I mean, integrated data and AISP and all of this. It takes years and it's totally worthwhile and it's so important and it's the future. So if you don't do it, if you're thinking about getting involved with an integrated data system in your state or county or whatever, you should do it because this will be everywhere in the future and it's just time to get started now. It's a really helpful process because what you do is, as Amy said, you first integrate people, and that took us several years and hundreds of meetings because no one wants to share data unless they trust you. And we finally got to this point where we were in a room with the directors. We have 6 agencies that are providing their data that we work through the legal agreement and the governance for. And we were in a meeting, we were presenting to them, and you know, I think it was the director of education said, hey, I have a question. Are you guys going to be leading this? And we said, yeah, we're leading it. Like, no, what I'm saying is, if we commit to you, are we committing to you? Like, we don't want anyone else to be running this. How long will you two be here at the table for this conversation? And I only say that to illustrate, I think that's what it is. It's personal, like you have to be there long enough and going through those conversations and having all the difficult conversations about security and governance and all of those aspects so that people trust you with their data. So something that I have heard Amy say dozens of times, and we say all the time, our students tease us that we're going to get t-shirts made, is the data is shared at the speed of trust. And so we really work on this trust aspect. And that's actually what motivates my work in DSPG as well. I mentioned that Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funding. That's about how do you build trust so people will take data science tools and use them in geographically isolated communities as well. So we could invent the cure for cancer, and it doesn't matter if people don't take science, if the trust in science goes down. So I know I'm getting us a little off. Let me say, in terms of security, we worked with the security team and we went through every agency, all 6 agencies. We said, what are your security requirements? And we said, great. And we took the most stringent security requirements as our baseline. And then we said, where do we predict they're going to be in 5 years? And that's the system we tried to build towards. And then every time we went and talked to them, we talked about how we exceeded those expectations. So that was really helpful. Is don't start with a baseline, start with a prediction of where that baseline should be in the future. In our governance structure, we have a commitment to use the data, and we have a commitment to, meaning when we're done with it, we want it to be used for a purpose. And we want it to be used to support young children and their families. And I cannot tell you how important that user-centered focus is. Dharma mentioned that she does this user-centered design as well. There have been a number of times that people have put forward applications, they want to use the data for something. And someone will say, well, how does that support young children and their families? Like, how does that support the end user? And it's suddenly no longer a technical question. It's just like, oh, is that actually helpful to the group that it's supposed to be helpful to? So keeping people at the table, making sure that our security is tight, making sure that our, both the privacy, we had to develop whole new IT systems. We had to work with lots of different folks to get this figured out, but it is not a technical process. It's a social process, and getting that in place and getting the legal agreements in place through shifting politics and shifting directors, I think is one of the more difficult and rewarding things. So lots of outreach, lots of meetings, getting really technical people to support you and not having them talk so much at meetings is a good key. And I know we're all technical here, but I'm just saying the people that you're trying to convince are sometimes they just need the big picture. And learning how to communicate across these different groups is one of the more difficult things. But we have an organizational structure. We have a group, a community action group that reviews everything. Every data owner has to approve the use of their data. It goes into a data lake, but you can't just do whatever you want with it. We continue to have these rules and regulations around it. We have very tight restrictions. We work carefully with our partners to make sure that everyone approves the work in all the different steps of the process. So it's a true partnership. And we are Data Switzerland. So we were voted on to house it at ours, so it wasn't at any independent agency, so that more work could be done. And so it could be a more equitable and fair approach. And I'll push it back to you, Rekha. Sorry, I thought it was a long answer, but just the tip of the iceberg. It's so exciting, the work that's being done across the US here.
Agreed. And you're right. I mean, I did point you a question that like multiple books have been written about. All right. So next question is going to go to David and Gizem. We at AISP, we think a lot around centering racial equity. We have a toolkit that I'll drop in the chat in a second that is focused on this topic. And it's, for us, it's a really core component of ethical use of data. And I know that there's been a lot of work around kind of cultivating diverse students, diverse partners, like how can we train data scientists that represent, the American people, right? We know that data science has been a field that traditionally has been very male, very white. And we know that we are better when we have a diverse range of perspectives and experiences informing the work, right? So if you two could lead off and tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about this, and then kind of what you've found to be effective or not, right? We can also find a lot of value in learnings that aren't positive. So however you want to go with this topic.
I guess I'm okay to go first, and Gizem, cut me off if I'm going too long. This is certainly something I'm very passionate about. Maybe it's helpful to realize why many of us didn't, and we still don't identify as data scientists, despite the name of the panel and what we're doing here. So I'm actually a trained mathematician, actually pure mathematician that drifted in the direction of applied mathematics. And I also grew up in the Central Valley of California, and my mom was from Guatemala. And I will just be quite candid about the environment and lack of welcome in the broader math community at large around students of color. And so, I was a NSF and UC president's postdoc sitting at UCLA with a great mentor with the right, R1 trajectory in my career. But, a few talks came in the door around 2009, 2010 around big data into the math department, talking about these problems like solving the Netflix problem, things like that. And all of a sudden, a light bulb for me went off then that I'm doing applied math. I saw more diverse students in applied math than I did in pure. And some of that was just the, there's a little more motivation. There's a little more attraction to the field. There's more sense of authenticity to the problems. But if you look at applied math, when I grew up in it, that's coupled oscillators. And if you're lucky, you get to graduate to fluids. And so when I saw problems of this level of relevance with social potential for social impact and an authentic connection to the research questions and the impact of solving the math problem, I viewed this field that had not yet been coined as something that I thought would draw very diverse students that would traditionally opt out of a STEM degree back in and consider things that eventually was called data science. And on that spot, that's where I started changing my career. I joined first a minority serving institution and did not join any of the number of R1 offers I got because I wanted to understand if that seemed to prove out to be the case that one could attract very diverse students into this field. And it did. Over my time at the University of San Francisco, it was an outstanding demonstration, at least for me, that there was good work to be done here. When we think about now getting to redo this and founding at University of Chicago at its core principles at the Institute, inclusion and representation, we want to make sure that we don't fall down the same pitfalls that software engineering representation looks like. We're at the beginning of training the next generation of data scientists. What pieces do we put in here to make sense? So for me, we're trying to take a very ambitious approach to that problem. The easy, hard stuff is to ensure the new majors we design and everything around this includes the best practices we now know in recruitment and retention of underrepresented students in STEM. Those pieces are in place. At its core is a thing like Clinic, which is also centered right now in and around social impact. It's with other types of groups as well. But practicums, capstones that have the opportunity for students to make impacts in their local communities, working on really hard problems in data science is one key aspect of diversifying the future data science pool. But the flip side of that is, as I mentioned kind of briefly before, is that we're the University of Chicago, and anyone on this call can kind of say the same thing. We're the University of Florida, chances are we're probably going to be successful at something. But my question has always been, what is scalable? What is transferable about what we're doing to the community college that we're partnered with in Chicago, right? And Chicago State University or University of Illinois, Chicago, or Cal State Fresno, and many of the other universities that don't stand a priori to be a source of great deal of funding to do work like this, but have potentially just as high impact for the communities that they serve. And so we're working right now on building a new network of universities like this in partnership to begin to develop what are the essential ingredients of the work that everyone on this panel is kind of doing and others are doing that is scalable and portable and financially sustainable at these different universities. And there is where I think we'll hit a network effect of action. Like University of Chicago has a far more diverse undergraduate student body than I was expecting when I arrived, and that's great. And we're surrounded in a very diverse community, and we have a great deal of good to do here. But much more is if I can figure out how 50 institutions in 50 different locations have figured out sustainable and local ways to do impact through the work we're doing that don't just rely on, frankly, very expensive summer programs that we all also kind of run. And so that's where I'd love to have further conversation on that kind of exploration. I think that's the frontier of using a network effect on expanding representation in this. All right, I went way too long. I apologize for that.
No, it's all relevant and helpful. All right, Gizem, you want to jump in?
I just wanted to say here that we were not as successful as we would like to be in this space. So it has been an issue for our program at UVA. And last summer, we addressed this partially through our university's diversity program. So that's something that I think the other programs could actually do too, because there are certain efforts that people are taking in the universities. So for example, in our case, UVA is part of the Leadership Alliance, which is a group of 35 institutions, which includes colleges and universities. And the mission is, I'm just going to read it from their website, is to develop underrepresented students into outstanding leaders and role models in academia, business sector, and public sector. So what happens is that UVA diversity programs work with the Leadership Alliance, and they create the summer research programs to host students, undergraduate students, who can actually work with faculty in the university during the summer as interns and actually get this research experience. So these are coming from HBCUs and other underrepresented minority students, programs include these students. So what we did was we partnered with them. We had our DSPG Young Scholars program as a site as part of this program, and therefore we were able to, and through collaboration, partnership with our UVA's School of Data Science, and I see Claudia is also in the audience, so we work with Claudia for that, and through these partnerships, we were able to get some of these students last summer. So it requires, I think, more effort from each program. So we cannot just expect our programs to be diverse. So we really need to be proactive in doing so. It's very important.
That's really great. Claudia has just posted something. I'm going to put it in for everyone. Hold on, it's not working. We'll drop it in for everyone.
And I'll post the link to the Leadership Alliance, because maybe your university is already a partner there, so you can actually find out.
And if I could just jump for a sec and say, so important as we were thinking about the students to bring in, but also, to not underrepresent certain groups of students, and also not to overrepresent certain groups in the data we use. So I want to give a shout out to what Amy posted from that, the centering racial equity discussion. That has been very helpful. We've actually met with a bunch of the different agency groups and worked through that framework with them. It's been really nice.
Yeah, and that was a co-created document with a lot of contributors. So AISP, we were the lead cat herders, but we were not the brain trust behind that. It was a large group of folks from across the United States who informed that work. All right, we have 10 minutes, so plenty of time to get into a few other questions. So here's a question. I'll let whoever wants to jump in. There's an endless amount of agencies, nonprofits who need this help, right? Whether it's the Kale work that I know a lot of you are engaged in, or whether it is, like deep, complex, nuanced analytic work. There's a lot of support needed. So how do you pick your projects? How do you pick sites? Like, do you have a criteria? Do you do like a request for application? Do you just pick sites you've already worked with? Do you pick those who already have data flow? What are their characteristics, and kind of how do you do that? So I'm going to open this up to anyone, but I'll let Karthik lead on it. And then I think Gizem has some thoughts as well, but anyone feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so we kind of mentioned, we kind of have a solicitation process. The program starts in most often first week of June, 1st of June, but we only release the open position call, project solicitation call in early January. We release it out, and then we hold few info sections in February, March time period, and we close the call during middle of March. And then we shortlist people and start interviewing them in March, April time period. So that's a process we kind of follow in getting project information, follow through and things like that. During the solicitation open call, we ask them to put what is the question investigation they want, and what is the data available, what's the variables available, what's the number of rows data we have. So we kind of ask the data size type of questions to them. Those are all collected beforehand. And during that interviews we have with them, we try to go depth into what is the investigation, who's involved within their organization, how much is the leadership in the organization supports these things, these activities, and all of those questions. Then we go into those aspects. And we do require them, we put a rule in that they have to provide the data to us 2 weeks before the program starts at minimum. It needs to be there. So most often when we discuss things with them, and once our board has approved it, we immediately communicate to them. So we give 1 month time period between when the program is starting and when we are announcing who has been selected. So within that one month time period, we try to gain access to the data. And before the interns we meet with the interns and start meeting with them, we have an internal review of the data sets that we gather from them. And we identify what are the other public data sets now we can use towards those things. And most often we will know the skill gap we will have with the students and what is the question they're asking and what data set we have. And we try to go and get industry volunteers to take part and work with us over the summer time period to fill in the gaps of technical skills gaps that we may have. And most often we will have the content skills gap too. And we go and talk with faculty members within UNF and other Florida universities to come and help us out on the skill gaps and the domain skills gaps that we see to make the project successful. So those are the other things we try to do before on June 1st, we start the program on.
So I feel like I'm answering all the questions, so I'll be really quick. Here. So as I mentioned before, the engagement with the stakeholders is very important, is a distinguishing feature of these programs. So for us, there should be the project should have a stakeholder willing to participate in the program. So that's very crucial. So someone, especially if we're using the data from the agency, someone from the sponsoring agency needs to be hands-on, and they need to have rapid responses to the question. So we want that person to have to be in the sponsoring agency. And of course, the scope should not be too big, right? These are 10, 11-week programs, and the students are at the same time learning about data science tools. So you cannot expect to have a really large scope for these students. So with that, I'll let someone else speak.
Yeah. Dharma, jump in. Sorry.
Yeah, I think one of the other getting back to the importance of building relationships and having sustained relationships around episodic work that takes place in the summer programs. A number of the summer programs have a geographic focus. So they're working with local communities, like the University of British Columbia basically works with the city of Surrey on something every summer. And that's one thing that, even though the work is episodic, there's building relationships, that are going to be trusted and ongoing. Our program doesn't have a geographic focus, but we do require that our project leads are on site working with students 20 hours a week. So it tends to have a geographic flavor. And I think, Karthik, also your program as well, right? You're working with the same nonprofit organizations that are right there around your university community as well, right?
No, within the DSSU program, we may not repeat them, but we connect them with the other entities within UNF, and then they receive the continued support in different aspects from universities through other centers that are there. But most often, like, it becomes capstone projects and things like that. There is some kind of continuation of work happens, and every nonprofit is different, and what is the help they need is very different. So that's kind of answers to the question that is there in the Q&A section from Devrim. So it's like maintaining initiative started with the nonprofit is very, very difficult. Every nonprofit is different. And most often, help, you start with data, the continued help is not necessarily connected to data aspects. It's more about the programmatic aspects. So the help needed is most often, in my experience, has been different. And my job stops with me connecting them with the other entities within the universities or other help that exists within the county. Going to Gizem was mentioning about the importance of them being available. So one of the questions we asked during the interview is, what is your summer vacation plan? So we don't want them to be surprised that, I'm gone in July 1st week when the students are really, that's when the analysis starts. They are, that's it, we can't communicate with them. So we asked them to know, you can travel, but we need to know that you can be on the scheduled time, that 1 hour, 2 hours, we want them, they need to be available. We don't care whether they're enjoying their life in Hawaii or where. They could, but we want that connection to stop for a longer period, because it's a short time period, just some 12 weeks, and 1 week we being out of communication with them has a big impact in the progress we will be making.
Yes, that's an excellent lesson learned. In that vein, we have 2 minutes. So I'm going to ask everyone rapid fire to share what's one thing that you suffered through and learned and you want everyone else to know. So Karthik just shared, like, ask about vacation plans. And yes, I've had same experience with a summer data science program in my experience. So one thing, everybody got one? David, you want to lead?
Sure. Do not underestimate the amount of time it takes to get some of these things through your local legal group. Do not. That is just an infinite well of fun if you open that door.
All right, rapid fire. Who's next? We got 1 minute.
Do not assume that, do not assume that incumbent people who in turnover will know who you are and trust you and understand the process.
So Amy mentioned this data ownership. Most often people collect data and they think they own the data, but they are not the owners of data. So when they collect data, it comes from funding agency. Funding agency always put something, like David mentioned, legal things where they own the data. So they really can't share the data with you. And so it creates a lot of problems. Always ask clearly who is the actual owners of data.
And always have a backup plan for those projects.
Plan all of your meetings with stakeholders before it starts, because they will keep canceling on you. So start early, plan often, be flexible.
All right, I'll echo, be flexible.
All right, I think that's everyone. So we are right on time. Thank you, everyone. That was great. Lots of nuggets here. I feel like this was just like a little data sharing therapy session. Well done, everyone. Give yourself a hug. It's hard work, right? All right, Doug, are you going to close us out, Sarah?
Sure, I'll start, and maybe Sarah, and then we can let Michaela jump in. But thank you all. I'll just echo that. Appreciate it. This is a long journey. We are all here. Please reach out to any one of us that you may be interested to, and the stories that we're hearing. But I appreciate everyone sharing today. Sarah?
Yeah, I would just say thanks to all of you, for all of our panelists and speakers, and ADSA for hosting us. And thanks to all of the audience for joining. And if you have ideas or connections for us to make, I saw a lot of nice things come up in the chat. Please share those with us. It can be hard to find each other, even on our own universities, much less across our very big country and around the world. So please let us know what you're doing, and let's keep having conversations.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I'll close us out by saying, don't forget, we have regularly scheduled sessions Wednesdays at this time. Check out the schedule. Lots of good stuff coming soon. And thank you, speakers, panelists, chairs. This was really super informative. We will try to capture some of those resources and links that were mentioned in the chat and condense those into a doc and share those as well. So keep an eye out. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.